Good day, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or even good evening. Today is Sunday. Now, we might have some debate on whether or not the weekend starts on Friday or on Saturday, but we can all be pretty sure that the weekend ends today. So, what we are doing today is I am being reminded by my sponsors, which I do not have, that I am contractually obligated to report on the situation of the raid every once in a while. And this once in a while was at this point almost 3 weeks ago. That's the last time we went over to talk about the raid situation between all of the specs and how they have been performing, so we're gonna go over and talk about it today. To be fair, there is something more interesting and something more cool to talk about, which we will likely go after tomorrow, if we don't have any major news from 9.2 in the meantime, for example, which is the situation in Mythic Plus, because we can go and take a look at how Mythic Plus has evolved just looking at Mythic Plus time walking for Legion, in case we can find some interesting changes compared to the current Mythic Plus situation and the meta. But for today we are going to stop at how the situation is going in the raid. The reason why it is interesting to go over the raid situation right now isn't because there is going to be some huge news or some huge twists in the current situation. At this point, this raid has been out for over 5 months. So it came out basically early July. That's been 5 full months, and we are approaching the 6th month of the raid, literally half a year. So you're not really going to find any surprises. You're not really going to discover that out of nowhere certain specs are now being much more valuable than others. The reason why it's going to be interesting to look at the raid now is because in the meantime, since the last time we went over this, we have gotten the release on the PTR of the tier sets that will be available in 9.2. We have also gotten the notion that you will be able to use 2 legendaries at the same time in 9.2. So this is a massive increase in power, and also it's going to massively change, in some cases, even rotations, even the ways certain specs play. This is relevant because now you can start looking at the situation of each spec in the raid and then start comparing it with how is their situation looking like in 9.2, because how is it going to look for you as a player if your spec is currently doing terrible in the raid and you don't even have that much of an interesting tier set at the moment, and your current outlook on being able to use 2 legendaries at the same time is kind of poor? What happens in the complete opposite scenario? What happens if you're one of the currently best performing specs in raid encounters while also having one of the better tier sets, while also looking like you're gonna get one of the better synergistic 2 legendary combos? That is why it's gonna become more interesting to look at the raid now. Now that we have this knowledge of what's gonna happen in 9.2, we can start pairing that knowledge not just in how powerful it is by itself, but also how powerful it can be put together with the current strength of the spec. Whether the spec is doing fine right now, it's doing badly, or it's doing great. So let's go and take a look at how the raid has progressed in the last few weeks that we have neglected it. So, as usual, when we look at this type of stuff, we take a look at the popularity to see if there is some change. Then again, it's unlikely in this situation we will find too much. There are a few things that we can notice from the few weeks that we have missed this, which is the Frost Mage gaining more and more popularity. Before it was slightly before Fire Mage, and then it was buffed in single target. It slightly past Fire Mage, and now it's getting even further ahead, and this time past Shadow Priest as well. We also have the continuation of the Life and Death of Marksmanship Hunter, which is getting less and less popular compared to Beast Mastery. Now it's dropped down to significantly less than half of the player base for Hunters compared to Beast Mastery. Another interesting situation is the continued loss of Elemental Shaman. Look at the absolute state of Elemental over time. They have lost less and less representation, despite not really performing badly, not really being a bad performing spec at the moment in raids. It's just not, it's never been in the first place a very popular spec to begin with, and it looks like now over time they haven't really kept up with their initial popularity from 9.1. So this is the current situation as far as DPS is concerned. We have a little bit more of an interesting change when it comes to tanks. Because while we were already talking about Blood Death Knight becoming more and more represented in raid encounters to the point that it was getting closer to Brewmaster and now it has passed Brewmaster, but the other interesting part is Protection Paladin. We talked at length every time we go over this raid or this Mythic Plus overview how Paladin remains one of the most popular picks when it comes to tanks, regardless on whether or not it's very used at the high end. So even if in high keys in Mythic Plus Paladin wasn't that popular, it still was the most popular tank in Mythic Plus, just like it's the most popular tank in Heroic Sanctum of Domination, while not really being popular in Mythic tank combos. Now we have gotten another rise, however, because on top of rising in Mythic Plus, which is something we will see in the Mythic Plus video, they have actually started rising in raid encounters as well. Now they have gotten much closer to Vengeance Demon Hunter compared to before, and it's only at this point going to be a matter of time before Protection Paladin is going to overtake Vengeance Demon Hunter. It looks like the difference from Brewmaster and Blood is still too far away to bridge that gap, but the one to Vengeance is close enough. It's close enough that in 1, perhaps 2 weeks, we will be able to see Protection Paladin overtake Vengeance. Lastly, we can finish with a surprising point that, unlike Protection Paladin, who is rising in Mythic Plus, and now is starting to rise in raids as well, who is not rising is Guardian. Guardian Druid, who is and has been the most popular Mythic Plus tank in 9.1 for this season at high keys, it hasn't really gotten a similar amount of representation in raid encounters. So that is a peculiar point. We have talked about already the problems of tanks and the compositions in raid encounters, being able to play a Brewmaster, so you get the debuff of Monk, being able to play a Vengeance Demon Hunter, so you get the debuff of the Demon Hunter, whereas the other tanks don't really bring as much. This has been made less important in this tier because Windwalker Monks are pretty good, Havoc Demon Hunters are also pretty good, so it's gonna be less needed for you to have a Brewmaster Monk and a Vengeance tank. You will be able to find your debuffs in your DPS players, so now more tanks can be freed up and have more spots, but it's not really been the case for Guardian, which is interesting. And then after the tanks we have the healers. The only important one here in healers isn't that Holy and Restoration are still very high, and this time around it's Holy Paladin who has overtaken Restoration by just a handful of logs. That is something that has remained the same for months at this point. The interesting thing is the better and higher relevance of Mistweaver Monk. If we compare this from the start of this tier, Mistweaver Monk has more than doubled its representation compared to before. It is basically now twice as likely, twice more likely to see a Mistweaver Monk, and now it's even closer to Discipline and Restoration Druid in terms of logs. Of course, you can still talk about this one being very late into the tier. There is a reason why Discipline Priest is so low in logs, even though if you go back to the world first race and all the top guilds, you will find Discipline Priests everywhere. The deeper you go into the tier, the more the bosses are nerfed, the more health you have, the more defenses and damage you can do over time, which means fights are gonna be shorter, you're gonna be needing less defensive cooldowns and raid cooldowns, you're gonna be able to just pass on having Discipline, which is also a more complicated and more tricky build to play compared to Holy Priest, which is much easier, much more of a free-flowing build. So even priests themselves, many of them prefer playing Holy in general, so it's just probably that has made Discipline fall over time as we go deeper into the tier, but it is still relevant to talk about Mistweaver becoming more popular over time. You could still be a doomer, you could still be pessimistic and say that this is just because now the bosses are much easier, and as soon as the bosses become tough again, Mistweaver will be put on the side again for the specs that have damage reduction cooldowns, and everything will go back to the way it was. But for the moment, you can at least enjoy Mistweaver Monk becoming and being more relevant than before. Now, after we have gone through the popularity, we have to step on the performance and how the specs have been doing. Now, at this point, the changes in performance are going to be few and far in between. There are still going to be some. We can still see a few of them. We can see, for example, that Hunters have been plateauing towards the bottom. Not even Survival has managed to escape the pit in which Beast Mastery and Marksmanship are. And then, of course, Rogues have now gotten an unplane of specs at the top. Top 3 specs in Raid Encounters are 3 Rogue specs. Fire Mage and Arcane have been fighting for being the best performing Mage spec. The last time it was Arcane that was slightly edging over Fire. This time around it's Fire Mage who has taken over Arcane Mage, but it is still very, very close. But the real interesting part when we look at the performance is what we pointed out at the start of the video, which is comparing this to how is their current situation when it comes to what are they going to get in 9.2. For example, when you look at the bad specs, the bad performing specs at the moment, to see if they're going to be getting something good from either the tier sets or perhaps just the combination of 2 legendaries that are going to be able to give them a new lift in their performance. And when we look at that, it's kind of bad from the start, because one of the better ones at the moment is Rogue. Assassination and Subtlety, being able to stay Ventir and use Obedience as their Covenant legendary is very good, because it's going to allow them to use another very powerful legendary in combination. The tier set of Assassination has just gotten buffed to be much better, the 2-piece set bonus, and Subtlety already has a pretty decent combo of set bonuses. So they are already at the top, their tier sets are good, their Covenant and Legendary combos are very good, so that is not looking too good, honestly. You know, if I were a Rogue, I would start having some fears for the future, because the likelihood that these 3 Rogue specs are going to be kept at this level for yet another patch is unlikely, I would say. When we look at other specs, on the other hand, it's not looking too good, because when you look at Frost Death Knight and Unholy Death Knight, for example, their performance is not too good. And at the same time, their Covenant and Legendary combos are pretty poor. They are amongst the weakest in terms of combos when it comes to legendaries, and their tier sets are meh, but we have just gotten an update on Blizzard planning to tune those tier sets, so perhaps they're gonna get something in return that is going to give them a little bit more of a punch, but they still have the problem of their poor Covenant combo, which doesn't look too promising if you consider the situation they currently are in. And maybe you're like, well, you know, they are kind of like Elemental Shaman, they are middling, but they are doing much better in Mythic Plus. No, that's not even the case for Death Knight, because even in Mythic Plus, when we will go over the Mythic Plus video, they are not doing too great either. So the situation for them is not too great. Another situation a little bit different than the 3 Rogues at the top is the 4th spec at the top, which is Fury. Because Fury doesn't really have too good of a combo when it comes to legendaries, so it's a little bit of a deficit. Their tier set bonuses are pretty strong, but their legendary combos are nowhere near the power of the Rogue ones. And if you want to stay within the same class, they are not at the same level of Arms Warriors. Other specs to put in focus, of course, we have Balanced Druid. Balanced Druid has been the currently better performing range DPS spec in the raid, and what do you know, they also have a very good powerful tier set bonus, not the strongest one, but still a pretty good one, and they do have currently the best combination of legendaries that they can use, because they are already Ventir, they are already using the Ventir Covenant legendary, Sinful Hysteria, which means they're going to be able to choose whichever possible best second legendary they want, which puts them in a very, very good position for 9.2. So looking at something completely opposite of this, which is going to be very good to look at, is Affliction Warlock, because Affliction Warlock is currently very poor. Affliction Warlock is not performing too well in Raid Encounters, it's middling at best in Mythic Plus. So what they are getting in 9.2, given this performance in Raid Encounters, is a very, very good tier set for them. Both the 2-piece and the 4-piece set bonus are going to be very nice, save you a bunch of GCDs from reapplying dots, and they also have a pretty good set of legendary combos. They are the only Warlock spec of the 3 Warlock specs that all play Night Fae. They are the only one that can already do very well with the Covenant legendary, the Kain Soul Satchel, and now they can pair it with whatever other legendary they want. So Affliction, while being towards the bottom, is planned to be doing quite well in 9.2, at the very least better than what they have been doing so far in Raid Encounters. 2 other specs specs that are poised to be on the same level are the two hunter specs. Honestly, let's just put all three of them together: survival, beast mastery, and marksmanship. All three of them have some pretty good tier sets. The standout one is survival, which looks to be insane. Particularly though, we have to point out it's much better for the moment in Mythic Plus in AoE, so perhaps it's not as powerful in red encounters, but it is still very solid. Beast Mastery and Marksmanship still also have some pretty decent tier sets that are going to empower some pretty good parts of their kit. The kill command and the damage of their Beast Mastery pet, as well as the trick shots buff of Marksmanship, giving them much stronger cleave than they normally wouldn't have, and even a buff in single target, because now trick shots will work in single target as well, which has been a pain point, a severe pain point of the Marksmanship Hunter build, being able to do single target, which is also kind of relevant for bosses, because bosses, I am told, are very often single target phases. So it's gonna be a pretty good tier set for all hunters, and even their legendary combos are pretty solid. They are pretty good. Hunters can use the Night Fae legendary, the fragments of the Elder Antlers, they can even use the Kyrian one, honestly, and then they can pair it together with whichever other best legendary they can use. So it's good when you look at their situation in red encounters that the future in 9.2 is giving them some pretty powerful points. So you can expect them to do much better compared to what they have been doing so far in red encounters. What about though the less than good situations? We talked about balance and even the hunter specs and even Affliction Warlock being poised to do quite well. What about the ones that are not as promising? Well, you know, we pointed out that Warlock Affliction was doing quite well. There is going to be the question mark of both Demonology and Destruction. Demonology is already a quite respected single target build for raid encounters. It's already doing quite well. It is currently the second best performing range DPS spec in the raid. So it's certainly not really in need of some massive help in terms of damage. They do have a very powerful tier set, so that is already positive, that is already bright for the future. What they don't have that is as good as Affliction, and perhaps it's justified given how much better they are performing, is the Covenant Legendary combo, because their current Covenant Legendary is not going to be as powerful. They are mostly Night Fae, like all of the other Warlock specs, but they don't really synergize as well with the Kayn Soul Satchel. They don't have too many powerful options in their Covenant Legendaries, so they cannot draw as much power from that Covenant Legendary. What is the same situation but worse is Destruction, because at the very least Demonology is already doing well. At the very least Demonology is already a fearsome single target build. Destruction at the moment is not a fearsome anything. Destruction at the moment is kind of like a half completed spec that is not really excelling in too much of anything. So it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem when, just like Affliction and just like Demo, they have a very powerful tier set for AoE, I guess, for single target funnel to get some free Reign of Chaoses in Mythic Plus packs, for example. But for bosses, that tier set is not too powerful, and what's worse for them is that they don't even get bailed out by a very powerful set of legendaries. Unlike Affliction, which is very good, unlike Demonology, which isn't too good but at least they're doing nice already, Destruction isn't doing too nice and doesn't have too good of a legendary combo system, so it's not looking too bright for Destruction at the moment. And to finish out the situation, we're gonna close with mages, because mages, at the moment, you do have the question mark. The tier sets are serviceable, some of them are quite good, like the Fire Mage one is very good, the Frost Mage one has just recently gotten buffed, the Arcane one is also pretty good. Their problem though is the Covenant and their normal legendary combo. None of the three specs are particularly good with Covenant legendaries. None of them are going to gain a particularly massive synergy in combos. The worst one off is likely going to be Fire Mage. If they want to stay Night Fae, Heart of the Fae is very bad for fire. Frost and Arcane can get some bigger benefits. Arcane has gotten Harmonic Echo buffed as well, because it makes more sense now to also have some single target element, but it's it's not great. It's not huge. To be fair, none of the 3 mage specs are doing particularly badly. They are not pariah of raid encounters. They are not avoided by the majority of the population. They can still do just fine, so it's not that they needed a massive push in 9.2 to become strong, but you know, they are not amongst the best either. Not even close. So perhaps if you were hoping for some major push from 9.2 to make any of these 3 specs way more relevant, it's hard to imagine their situation improving drastically given their current possible combination of legendaries. The only other couple of ones I feel like talking about as we close the video when it comes to the performance of the specs in raid encounters are the 2 ones we put at the top when we went over the synergy of legendaries for melee DPS, which were Ret Paladin and Feral Druid. They are both kind of in the middle. They are both middling. They are not bad by any stretch, so it looks kind of good. Retribution Paladin's tier set is okay. It's not insane, but it's definitely good, and their legendary combos is actually great. It's very, very good. And so is Feral's one. Feral tier set bonus is okay, although it's a little bit more focused on AoE, more so than just pure single target, but they can get much better pure single target thanks to their legendary combos. Very, very powerful. They can keep what they have already been using for ages, which is the Night Fae legendary, Celestial Spirits, ever since it came out, and then pair it with whatever they want. If they need more single target, if they need more AoE, they can change their legendary, so their situation is actually looking very, very good for 9.2, given what they're gonna be getting in terms of, I guess we can call them borrowed powers, both the tier sets and the double legendaries, so it does look definitely quite good for them. So to me, when we look over all of this, it looks like in the end, there is going to be probably a need for some balancing outside of all of this, outside of the tier sets and outside of the legendaries. It's likely that some of the specs will need, you know, a little bit of a bump up in their base power, not just balancing the tier sets and not just balancing the legendaries, but also their standard rotation, their standard build is going to need a little bit of a power up, unless you want to completely remake and completely rework some of the legendaries or some of the tier sets, because at the moment some of the specs are just going to be performing too bad compared to others, especially when you consider the current situation of the specs. When you see the best performing spec getting one of the better tier sets and one of the better legendary combos, and then some of the weaker specs getting some of the weaker legendary combos and some of the weaker tier sets, you know, it starts to become difficult to imagine 9.2 being balanced enough to allow this to go live without any further changes. So for the moment, this is where we will stop. Of course, we will continue to watch 9.2 PTR changes to see if any more of this is going to come in, how many more tier sets are going to be changed, how many more legendaries are going to be changed, and if we're going to continue to have some further modifications, some further tuning of the specs as we get close to the next patch. For the moment, this is all for the raid. We're going to continue tomorrow or perhaps in a couple of days to also look at Mythic Plus as we get more and more data for the Legion Time Walking Mythic Plus keys. There are some pretty cool things to notice from those entries, so we will look into those as well. Now, as usual, thank you guys for watching the video. If you want to continue supporting the channel or if you want to start now, it's fine as well. You can leave a like on the video, you can comment down below. This time around, let me know which one of the specs you are planning to play in 9.2 if you are thinking about changing your main. Perhaps even because of the current situation, perhaps even because you were playing, say, Enhancement, you hoped for Enhancement to get a big revival, but you lost hope, and now you're looking into some other spec. And then, of course, feel free to subscribe if you want to keep up to date with the horde of videos that get released every week by yours truly. Aside from this, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, it's 1:27 p.m. and I have to go eat. Today on the menu we have gnocchi.